Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us today, one of our regular guests. I'd love to have him on more, but he is in demand, as you would realize when I say his name. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, a former Assistant Treasury Secretary. He was in charge of all economic policy for the United States of America, father of Reaganomics, also a very deep resume. I could probably talk for 5 minutes and not cover it all. Also, he's a journalist, worked for the Wall Street Journal for years. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
I'm pleased to be with you, Greg.
We always love you. You're one of the favorite people that people like to hear from because you're one of the insiders, and you're not just an insider. You're a guy with not only inside knowledge, but you have academic knowledge of how the economy works and how it's supposed to run. Some of the things that you've told me in the past that just stuck with me with this. You know, we used to do this for, 9 months and do 6 months, 9 months, and we take our foot off the gas, and we've been doing this since 2008, and, to no avail. And what I wanted to get from you is this, you have said, along with many other people, that this comment, which has stuck with me also, and coming from a guy like you, makes me feel like I don't feel so dumb, because what you said was, I'm surprised this has gone on for as long as it has. And that's what I've heard from a lot of very smart people that make that offhanded comment. Well, surprised it's gone on for as long as it has. So my question to you right out of the gate is 2014, the year we start hearing metal on metal. We start smelling, iron hitting metal with no grease, and we start seeing a tire go out in front of the truck, and all of a sudden, oops, a Wile E. Coyote moment, as it were.
Well, Greg, it would seem that way, but what's happened, I think, is that the Federal Reserve has learned how to manipulate all markets. And they have complete cooperation from the financial press to manipulate how people perceive economic reality. You see, in my day, when I was in the Treasury or at the Wall Street Journal, the type of manipulation that we are experiencing today would have been impossible. First of all, it's strictly illegal. And the Attorney General would have arrested the Federal Reserve Chairman or something like that. But even more important, the kind of people in place, it never would have occurred to them to manipulate markets and prevent their normal functioning. So what's happened, I think, is, it really was a consequence of the financial deregulation. The financial sector simply got out of control, and it left the economy tremendously exposed. And so the Fed began manipulating. First, it was manipulating the bond price, interest rates, by buying up all the bonds. And then it realized that the liquidity it was pouring into the banks was not getting into the economy, but into stock prices. And so it has to keep this manipulation going. It has to always come up with something else. And as all its money printing progressed, the gold price took off and hit $1,900 an ounce. And they realized then that the gold price was a threat to their policy of quantitative easing. And so they began selling short in the paper gold market to drive down the gold price to protect the dollar from quantitative easing. The other day when the Fed announced that beginning this month it was going to cut back slightly its purchase of bonds, it arranged a market orchestration. It managed to have the market rise sharply on the Fed's announcement instead of plummet. And they did that by creating a situation where people had gone short and all of a sudden had to cover their shorts because some huge buyer stepped in. Well, these types of manipulations now are so unexpected, certainly for somebody of my generation, that you never know when they're coming to an end. So what we have now, to sum up, we have a situation in which all the markets are rigged. All the markets are manipulated.
And there's anybody that says, and there's been some very learned people, I want to interrupt here. There's some very learned people that say that that there's no manipulation going on. And to you, does that sound preposterous?
That's preposterous. Look, we have the stock market at all-time highs. And where is the economy? There's not one. There's no recovery. Look, I think this is one of my last articles, certainly a recent one. If you just look at the latest wage statistics, these are compiled from the W-2s that employers issue. If you look at the latest wage statistics, you see that 40% of the American workforce, the ones employed, 40% of working Americans earn less than $20,000 a year. 53% earn less than $30,000 a year. Well, the poverty rate for a family of four is something like 24,000. So there's no consumer income to drive the economy, and they can no longer fill in with an expansion of consumer credit because everyone is up to the eyeballs in debt. Their credit card bills are heavy, their student loan bills are heavy, their mortgage debt is heavy, and the banks aren't lending because there's nobody that qualifies for a loan because everybody's got too much debt. So if the consumer's incomes are not growing, and we know for an actual fact, according to the official statistics, consumer incomes, except for the very, very rich, the top 1% or the top 1.1%, everyone else's incomes, real incomes, are falling and have been for a number of years. So if there's no income to drive the economy, there's no credit expansion to drive the economy, how does it go anywhere? You can't possibly have a recovery. And we don't see it in jobs. We don't see it in in the expansion of consumer credit. We don't see any sign of recovery, and yet the stock market is at all-time high. Why is that? If it's not manipulation.
And before I interrupted you, said, so, you spelled out the manipulation. All the markets are manipulated, gold, stocks, bonds, everything. So you're saying, so we have a situation now, and your cumulation for when is this going to fall apart? When is this the year that it starts falling apart? Or what's the situation we have now that you see your appraisal of 2014? Before I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
Well, you see, how long can they fool people? I don't know. They fool people on a lot of subjects for a long time. And as long as the financial press will tell their stories for them, we have a recovery. That's why the market's up. The fact that the labor force participation rate has collapsed, that is, people are leaving the labor force because they're so discouraged they can't find a job. They've looked for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. All the real evidence never comes up. And so how long does the financial press tell the story? How long does the rest of the world get fooled? I think the reason for the Fed's recent announcement that it was going to cut back its bond purchases by $10 billion a month, from $85 billion to $75 billion. I think this was to calm fears in the overseas dollar markets. There are as many dollars held by foreigners as by Americans, maybe more. and they're getting nervous because they're seeing the Fed create all this new money to support the banks. And so if you say, okay, we're cutting back, then it makes them say, well, maybe they'll stop this finally. I'll keep my dollars a while longer. It's a way to protect the dollar from the quantitative easing, you see.
So foreigners do have an effect on the country. Those foreign holders of our debt, John Williams says it's easily more than $12 trillion bonds, the whole spectrum.
Right.
He said so, and he thinks that that after this debt ceiling debate, they get another, I mean, Dr. Roberts, aren't we going to get a couple of $1 trillion with this 2-year bond? Aren't they going to ask for 2.3, 2.8, $3 trillion for the next 2? Aren't they going to ask for at least a couple of $1 trillion?
Well, Greg, you see, if there's no real recovery, and we do know the way they got the deficit down was with a lot of gimmicks. For example, the Treasury paid itself a huge dividend from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, both of which are busted. They did these kinds of tricks. And as soon as they got the debt ceiling increased, all of a sudden the debt jumped overnight $300 or $400 billion. So that shows you the extent of the tricks. So if you add back that debt to the $650 billion that they say is the current deficit, you're back to $1 trillion. So what happens now if they can't hide this year the fact that there's no recovery because the economy turns down again? It's been kind of bouncing along the bottom for 5 years, 5 or 6 years. Now, what if it falls off the cliff again and heads down, which it could very easily do, because there's no growth in consumer income, there's no growth in consumer credit, there are no good jobs. To avoid various health care costs, employers have redefined a lot of their full-time workers as part-time workers. People everywhere are feeling threatened. And generally, when you feel threatened like this, you don't go on a spending splurge, particularly if you don't have any money.
Well, one of the anecdotal things where they had 3 out of 4 of the NFL playoff games where they couldn't sell them all out. And also the BCS Bowl, the national championship we just had between Florida State and Auburn, the ticket prices were about half of what they were last year. So, that's anecdotal evidence. You can't go, aha, that's the economy turning down. But you're making the case with labor participation rates and income rates and all this that there's no recovery. There's no recovery whatsoever. And that's one of your articles you're talking about that there is no recovery, and it's a phony recovery. And now you're starting to hear talk about how income inequality. Of course, I think it's pretty disingenuous by the Democrats who are pushing this because of Obamacare is going to absolutely kill the economy. I've been saying this on my site. I want to get your thoughts on that. But income inequality, which I think is a phony issue as long as you have a $35 billion a month banker bailout in the back door and 0% interest rates and phony accounting. And you're talking about income inequality, and you're nobody says a word, not even the Republicans either, about this. I mean, $35 billion a month if you take them at their word, which a lot of people say it's more than that, just the banks. And, times 12 is, wow, isn't that, approaching $500 billion? Isn't that?
It's 900 billion.
Well, I'm talking about just the banker side, not the Treasury side, just the $35 billion a month, just the banker bailout.
Yeah.
We're talking north of $400,000 if you believe what they say going forward.
400 billion. Yeah.
400 billion, I said. 400 billion, sorry. $400 billion and not a word of income inequality. Well, let's cut off the bankers. Let's cut off the banker bailout, but nobody on either side of the aisle. And I think it's pretty disingenuous that the party of lie, the Democrats, because they lied as a party. It wasn't just the president. They lied as a party about Obamacare. I'm saying it. Flat out. Kay Hagan in my state, you can have your health care payment. It'll be cheaper. You can have your doc. That's a lie. Everybody got together, and they knew this was a lie. This was an enormous lie. What do you think about the Obamacare and the effects on the economy in 2014, minus even the employer mandate doesn't kick in until after the election? What do you think about the effects of Obamacare on the economy?
Well, there's so many deceptions in it. If people catch on, they won't sign up. They'll just pay the penalty or not pay the penalty. I'm not sure how the IRS can collect it. I think actually I don't think they're allowed to come after you like tax invasion. And so it may be they can't collect it except from your estate when you're gone. Look, Greg, we already know these facts about Obamacare. Everyone who had a private policy already was notified by their insurance company that they could keep the policy, but that the premium had doubled.
I had a manager in a restaurant tell me his premium went up 3.5 times.
Well,
he's not voting for a Democrat.
Well, was that for him or for all
for his policy for his family? 3.5 times.
Well,
to get the same coverage he had before.
Most people found that it doubled. They got letters from their insurer that said, you can keep this policy, but we have to charge you twice as much. And so you might want to go and see what it's like on the exchanges. That is, on the Obamacare system. Now, apparently, Greg, the reason these premiums doubled is that under Obamacare, thanks to apparently the feminists, everybody, including men, has to have pregnancy coverage, abortion coverage, female contraceptive coverage. In other words, they charge this to men. They charge elderly women for pregnancy coverage, whose family is grown and that's certainly not going to be having any more, or wouldn't be able to if they wanted. So the whole thing is constructed to produce massive premium income for the insurance companies. And so that, yes, that drains the economy. How many people, for example, I know a person who was paying $700 a month for the family. And now they're told it's going to be $1,500. Well, who's got $800 a month in discretionary income to add? Nobody. That's a lot of money.
And you're thinking by the end of this year, and people finally have an aha moment, and the people who have employer plans, they have yet to be screwed. They're going to get hammered. They think, oh, well, it doesn't affect me. Oh, yes, it will affect you.
Yes, they're going to be hammered, and everybody is going to be hammered. For example, I don't think it's well known. You know, if you're considered to be poor, you're not part of the normal Obamacare. You don't qualify for a subsidized premium. They throw you into Medicaid. And Medicaid has a state recovery. What that means is any money they spend on you while you're in Medicaid, they can recover from your estate. So suppose you have a family home. Maybe it's, a lot of poor people have a family home. Then when you die, your heirs don't get it. In comes Obamacare, and they take family home to reimburse Obamacare for your Medicaid coverage. People are not aware of this.
So poor people think, hey, I'm going to get a free ride, and yeah, you're going to lose your family farm, your family home, whatever your mom and daddy acquired, with their hard work. Yeah, you're going to take that from poor. So this is a giant transfer of wealth from poor people.
Right.
I mean, this is sad.
Well, it shows a total absence of any justice. So when the worst off are paying the highest price, they lose everything. So this has to be a big downer. But the policies themselves. If you have a subsidized policy, the premium is still fairly stiff. But even worse, the copays and the deductibles are very large. So you can't afford to use the policy once you have it. So the thing is, it's ridiculous. It's added. It'll probably double the cost of medical care in the United States. Wow. Because of all the layers of bureaucracy. You know, you have all these state exchanges, the federal exchange. Everything has to be monitored, and everything is arranged. For example, suppose you start off this year and you're making $35,000, and so you qualify for one of the subsidized premiums. And so you've got a subsidized premium, you're going along fine, you lose your job. Boom, your income drops, they throw you into Medicaid. Not only that, another downside, when they figure the cost to you of your share of the premium this year is based on the previous year's income. And so the government picks up a share of your premium based on your last year's income. Suppose your income rises this year. You have to pay it back. You have to pay back the premium. So suppose your income goes up $2,000. Well, the government's already put that in your premium. You just lost it. You have to give that back to the government to repay the fact that they had over-subsidized your premium based on last year's earnings, and this year it went up. So just imagine having to keep up with all of that. I mean, you see, you're moving in and out of programs. You're moving in and out of subsidy levels. People are not going to have any idea what's going on. And so it's going to have a terrible effect. And of course, they are also raiding Medicare in order to pay for Obamacare. So that means they're going to reimburse Medicare providers less. They're going to drop out. So for the people who've paid the payroll tax all their life, they're going to find it harder and harder to get good medical attention. So the whole thing is rigged for the insurance industry. And that's who's coming out of this. And I believe, I may be mistaken, I haven't had a chance to finish this research, but I think there are actual bailout provisions in the legislation where the federal government has to come to the benefit of the insurance companies if they don't make money in this deal.
I've heard that. So your appraisal of 2014 with Obamacare and, in your estimation, doubling the cost of insurance, doubling the cost of health care in this country, and with the the $2 trillion or so at least dollars going to expect with the debt ceiling increase, and the economy within no recovery, are we going to have a good 2014? What's your appraisal of 2014?
Well, I would expect that this year the economy will drop again, and they won't be able to hide it, and so the deficit will widen, and they don't have any gimmicks to hide that, and the widening deficit will again cause dollar worries because it means who's going to finance it? The Fed will have to print more dollars to buy the bonds. That is, more of the debt will have to be monetized, and so the Fed won't be able to cut back $10 billion a year. They'll have to increase it, $30 billion a year, $40 billion a year, whatever.
You think they could increase it by 30? So take back the 10 and add on another 30 or 40 billion?
If the economy falls enough, the deficit widens more, and it has to be financed. And the surpluses that our trade partners have with us aren't large enough for them to recycle them into the bonds, even if they were willing to do it. The trade surpluses aren't large enough any longer to finance the American federal budget deficit. So if the economy does weaken, as I expect it will, since there's no consumer income to drive it and there's no consumer credit to drive it, what will drive it? American firms, if they invest anywhere, it's overseas. Look, not a single Apple computer is made in the United States. I bought a new Remington razor yesterday. It's made in China. So if there's no investment here, except foreigners using their surplus dollars to buy up our existing assets, but there's no net new foreign investment. They buy up what already exists. So what then drives the economy? I can't see anything driving it. And so, I mean, it may just continue along the bottom, in which case no deficit can be closed because the revenues aren't there. And the economy can't grow because there's nothing to drive it. You know, I think it's John Williams has made it clear that the recovery that is perceived is because they so undermeasure inflation that when they deflate nominal gross domestic product, it still leaves a residue of real growth. But if they were actually measuring inflation the way they used to measure it, we've had no growth since the downturn. So,
and you're saying that you and I want to come back to this because I want to get this clearly because this is a big point. You're saying that 2014, with all the headwinds, Obamacare and increasing deficits and no growth in income, you're saying that if it turns down, that they're going to not only are they going to bring back the 10 billion, put it back to 85 billion. You're saying that you could see an easily 30 or 40 additional billion overtly stated by the Fed in quantitative easing, money printing.
Yeah, I can't know the amount because I don't know. That would depend on how bad the economy turns down. But what I am saying is they would have to repeal the announcement of a cut of 10 billion in quantitative easing, and they would have to add to it. They would have to add to it. How much would depend on how much the economy drops. Now, there are other bad things that can happen.
Such as?
Well, the United States is perceived as the superpower, who sort of calls the shots everywhere in the world. But it's failing to do that because it overreached so much and relied so much on lies to bring the rest of the world into agreement that the world's backed off. For example, Syria. Remember Syria? We were all set to attack Syria, and Washington was very confident it was going to bring its allies with it. It was going to have England and France and Germany. And what happened? The British Parliament said, no, we're not going to do it. And Obama turned to Congress to try to get some sort of authorization, and they said, no, we're not going to do it. And he couldn't get it from NATO, and he couldn't get it from the UN. And so all of a sudden, you remember the red line, the orchestrated evidence of Assad using chemical weapons. They had everything ready to go, but they couldn't do it. They'd lost control. The Russians stepped in and said, we'll take care of this. We're going to get rid of the chemical weapons. And with Iran, they've had Iran surrounded with something like 40 military bases for years. And right after Syria, Iran was supposed to be next. So what's happened now? Well, they're locked into peace talks with Iran about ending the embargoes or scaling it back. And so they have antagonized Russia and China. In fact, they've been very provocative militarily. And the Russians are getting their backs up. The Chinese are getting their backs up. The Chinese response was to expand their declared airspace, and they've stuck by it. They didn't back off. So at some point, people may say, well, what is it, these Americans? Are they really the number one top dog anymore? And if you don't think they are, what are you holding all their debt for? What are you holding all their currency for? What if they no longer can call the shots like they used to, maybe we better lighten up on this stuff. So that, I'm not predicting that, but I'm saying this is something that's sitting there that could happen. And it would add to everything else. So the government loses its clout, its credibility as the controller of world policy. The economy collapses out from under them. And then you see all kinds of people bailing out of all sorts of things. At some point, the hedge funds, look, the people who run these hedge funds, they can't be so stupid not to know the stock market is a bubble. It's not based on anything except the Fed printing money. When are they going to say, I think I'll take my profits? I'm not going to stay here and miss the peak and let it collapse on me. It's got to collapse at some point because it's artificial. There's no economy supporting, there's no economic boom supporting the stock market boom. This is an anomaly. I think I'll take my profits. At some point, that has to happen. So all this year, it can all play out in a very negative way. On the other hand, the Fed has proved itself ingenious in rigging markets, in rigging perceptions, in orchestrating, and they may come up with ever new successes in that way. The ones they have come up with, I would never have predicted, because I wouldn't have assumed that the public officials would behave in these crooked ways. But so I think we'll have to get used to the fact that since they control the printing press, they can manipulate a lot.
And final word on gold. Gold is a big deal. I mean, they would like you to think it's a barbaric, a barbarous relic, but otherwise, why would all these countries, hedge funds, wealthy people, China, et cetera, why would there be all this huge demand for silver eagles, for gold, for silver, huge, massive demands at the mint? They had to shut down for several weeks because the demand was so great. It's like you and I selling tacos and go, oh, gosh, Dr. Roberts, we've sold more tacos than ever. Let's stop selling them for 6 weeks. I mean, so tell me about how gold and silver fit into the mix.
Well, the prices are clearly manipulated in the paper futures market. See, there are two markets. One is for the physical possession of the bullion, and the other is the paper futures market. Well, the price is set in the paper futures market. It's not set in the market where you actually buy the stuff and take it home. And so that lets them manipulate the price with short selling. Now, the curious thing about the decline of gold over the last couple of years is that the physical demand for the actual bullion, gold and silver, has been rising strongly, even though the price is falling. So, in other words, people are not bailing out of gold in the physical sense. They're bailing out of paper contracts because that's the way they manipulate the price. So I think it was a serious mistake, maybe it was intended, to have these two markets separate, because the separate paper market lets bullion banks, Federal Reserve, anybody with lots of backing behind them, manipulate the price. They can step in, throw all kinds of shorts into the market, drives down the price, it triggers stop loss orders, it results in margin calls, all kinds of selling has to take place. And then the people who orchestrate this can step in, buy up the shares, and convert them into gold, and then they can take them to Asia and sell them at the high premiums over the spot price. So they make money all around. It's a money-making deal for the people who are operating this manipulation. So I think that what will bring this to an end is the West seems to be draining itself of actual physical bullion. It's moving into China. It's moving into other Asian countries. The silver now is moving heavily into India because they put those limits on the importation of gold. I think that was also in response to the Federal Reserve, which leaned on India and said, would you please help us keep the gold price down, stop buying so much? So
turn around, does gold and silver prices turn around this year? I mean, there's a lot of word out that they're getting low on demand. Eric Sprott, who runs an $8 billion fund, says they're running on fumes with the gold market, and there's high, huge demand, and they have to be, it's way exceeding mining. So at some point, don't they just run out of gold, or run out of gold they're willing to sacrifice?
Well, I think it's all moving to Asia. So there won't be any for the West. If the currency collapses, like John Williams expects, and you try to flee into gold, there won't be any there. The Chinese will have it. And you try to flee into silver, there won't be any there. The Indians will have it. So,
do you think that this is the year it turns around? Is this the year where 2014, you're not going to be that bold?
Greg, I want to say again, it's gone on longer than I thought it could go on. I didn't realize all the deceptive and crooked methods they would use to rig the markets. I mean, the notion of a democratic capitalist country having its markets rigged by its own authorities, that blows the mind. This is not normal. This could not have happened when I was in the Treasury. Nothing like this could have happened. So what will they do next? I don't know. You'd have to sit down and start speculating on what kind of manipulation can they come up with next. It's not the way we're used to thinking, you see.
And if you're a holder of gold or silver, physical assets, would you be a fool to sell them now, or is now a good time to sell?
In my opinion, you would be, because you may not ever be able to get them again. You see, look, the physical gold and silver, as I understand it, is flowing out of the West into Asia. They're not going to turn loose of it. There's no need for the Chinese to turn loose of it. And the Indians are not going to turn loose of it. So it's leaving here. And so I think that the real question for Western people who might be inclined to have gold and silver is, how much longer are they going to be able to get their hands on it? Because the market here is being drained of it. It leaves every day and goes into China. So the supply, the new supply, is limited. And I just don't see any reason to sell it. Now, it doesn't mean they can't drive the price down further. They can. And every time it rallies, like I think yesterday it happened, it was rallying strong, and all of a sudden all these sales materialized. So if the New York Fed, if the trading desk at the New York Fed is doing this, or they're having Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan do it, I don't know. I don't know exactly how they operate it. But you can see the massive shorts appear. I mean, the market shows that. All of a sudden, all these people, and they're sell short, Greg, at the most inopportune times. If you were trying to get out of a position, you would never sell that much at that time. The only reason
it only makes sense that who would drop 1 million ounces trying to make money. Who would do that? Hey, I'd like to make $50 an ounce less on my investment. I know I'll sell 1,000,000 ounces. Who would do that? I mean, I'm not a trader. I know that.
It's obviously done to drive the price down. And so I see it as protecting quantitative easing. Because if the dollar were to continue deteriorating relative to gold, the way it was doing way up into 2011, it has to spill over into the dollar's exchange rate with all other currencies. Because the dollar can't just be losing value in terms of gold and silver and not also be losing value in terms of other currencies. So the Fed had to stop it, and they have.
For now. And with that, my friend,
forever? Probably cannot do it forever.
And with that, we are going to wrap up the interview. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Of course, you had your wonderful website, which you only get donations. Isn't it paulcraigroberts.org?
Right.
And so if you guys want to get over there and, help Dr. Roberts here continue his work and offset some of his costs with donations, you should probably do that. The information you give out at your, former Assistant Treasury Secretary, worked in the media, you've got a very deep resume. I know I'm just glossing over the surface. You can read more about your resume. But anyway, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, thanks for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Glad to be with you, Greg. I appreciate being with you.